Dr. Phil destroying the woke liberals at The View wasn't on my 2024 bingo card, but it just happened. We're gonna break it all down, but first, welcome back to my channel. I'm Brad Polumbo. I cover all the craziest things on the internet, in our politics, and in the LGBT community from a center-right, moderate perspective. If you're new here, please do consider subscribing and sticking around, maybe even hitting that like button and commenting with your thoughts as we go along. Now, without further ado, let's see what Dr. Phil had to say on The View this week when the topic of school closures during COVID came up.
Think about it. In like 08, 09, smartphones came on and kids they stopped living their lives and started watching people live their lives. And so we saw the biggest spike and the highest levels of depression, anxiety, loneliness, and suicidality since records have ever been kept. And it's just continued on and on and on. And then COVID hits 10 years later, and the same agencies that knew that are the agencies that shut down the schools for 2 years. Who does that? Who takes away the support system for these children? Who takes them away and shuts it down? And by the way, when they shut it down, they stopped the mandated reporters from being able to see children that were being abused and sexually molested, and in fact sent them home and abandoned them to their abusers with no way to watch, and referrals dropped 50 to 60%. So
there was also a pandemic going on, and they were trying to save
kids' lives. Remember, we know a lot of folks who died during this, so it wasn't, people weren't laying around eating bond, but, well, you know what, we're lucky. Maybe we're lucky they didn't, because we kept them out of the places that they could be sick, because no one wanted to believe we had an issue.
Are you saying no school children died of COVID?
I'm saying it was the safest group. They were the less vulnerable group, and they suffered and will suffer more from the mismanagement of COVID than they will from the exposure to COVID. And that's not an opinion, that's a fact.
Well, Phil, we don't even have time to talk it out now, man. But thanks for coming. The new book is called We've Got Issues, and it is out tomorrow.
So since when has Dr. Phil been based? He is just totally spot on in this clip about the disastrous failure of school closures, and it honestly boggles my mind that anyone, even liberals and even the people on The View, actually still defend this disastrous failed policy at this point. Like, I know back in the spring of 2020, like we're talking March, April, May of 2020, I understand why people supported and agreed to close schools at that time, because we simply didn't know that much about COVID. We were all really scared. Like, I'm not too harshly judging people for making that decision, even though it was probably a mistake in hindsight, because we just didn't know that much. But over the course of the next school year, where many places in America still had school closures or even hybrid, partially closed schools, and some even continued that into the school year after that. Now that is truly indefensible at this point. I mean, by that time, we'd already seen what had happened in European countries where they never closed the schools, and the schools did not turn into super spreading events of COVID, nor were almost any children at risk, because we knew from very early on, just after a month or two of the pandemic, that the people who are most vulnerable from COVID and most likely to be hospitalized or die from the disease were not young children, but the elderly or people with severe medical conditions already. In fact, unless they had some sort of pre-existing serious medical condition, most kids faced a near zero mortality risk from COVID. So when these hosts on The View are fear-mongering about how we had to keep the kids safe and we must have saved the kids' lives, no, babe, that's not true. You simply upended them from their lives, turning their lives upside down, causing massive spikes in mental health issues, isolating them from their friends, causing huge losses in learning and academic gaps that will haunt this generation for decades to come, all while accomplishing next to nothing when it comes to actually mitigating the pandemic or protecting public health. Because if we're being honest, almost all these kids got COVID anyway, and they were just fine. The push to close the schools was never rooted in following the science anyway. It was largely done at the behest of teachers' unions, many of which were making insane, unrelated political demands, like wanting Medicare for all passed before they would reopen schools, or were using it to demand better pay or better conditions or their pre-existing agenda items from before the pandemic. It was never about keeping kids safe, and it did nothing to save children's lives. And I don't know how anybody is still clinging to that false notion. There are a couple more really interesting aspects of this clip for me, one of which is the fact that they immediately tried to go to commercial. I mean, it could be that they were genuinely running out of time in the interview and their producers were yelling them in their ear, go to commercial, go to commercial. But having been on TV a lot over the years and having worked in this industry and knowing people, I can also tell you that sometimes hosts do that when they don't like where a segment is going and want to shut down the conversation. We'll never know for sure, but I can't help but wonder if they were afraid of getting further embarrassed, and so that's why they suddenly needed to go to commercial. It's also really telling that the studio audience of The View was actually cheering for Dr. Phil as he was dunking on their hosts that they like and are fans of. Because the way that works is that they stack the live audiences with people who are fans of the show, who like the hosts, and only people who like the show would take time out of their day to go attend one of these things in the first place. So the live audience on set on a show like that is usually a very friendly audience to the hosts. And that's why we've seen them like boo and hiss at any Republican or conservative guests many times in the past. But Dr. Phil was dropping such a truth bomb that even the liberal audience members couldn't help but agree and applaud what he was saying. And that's the thing. The school closures issue, it really ultimately wasn't a left-right issue. Democrats, moderates, centrists, Republicans, all these people know how important schools are to our society, and that they always should have been viewed like grocery stores where, the staffers never got to stay home because grocery stores were essential and they were considered essential workers. Well, schools are essential too, no matter what Democrat politicians tried to argue for years, and closing them was an absolute disaster and failure. Americans across the political spectrum can see that, including, apparently, Dr. Phil. But somehow, the liberal hosts at The View are so out of touch and in such a bubble that they're still defending this disastrous failure. Make it make sense, y'all. I just can't. Alright guys, that's it for this video. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Can you understand what the hosts of The View were saying, or do you, like me, agree with Dr. Phil on this one? Don't forget to hit that like button and maybe even subscribe. This channel's growing so fast and I just love having you all here with me. And with that, I'll see you all in my next video. But if you're somehow not sick of me yet, and that would mean you'd have the patience of a saint, you can go here or here to check out more of my content that you might just enjoy.